This happened a couple of years ago when I was 19. I got a nightly gig at Boring Big Storage in a small town in Boring, Oregon. It was a neat place of about 60 units where people stored anything and everything. Every night I'd hang out with Morgan, who also worked the night shift. She was this beautiful, lively soul that made my heart stop every time I was with her. Her laughter always made the hauntingly quiet place feel less scary. But little did I know, I was about to uncover something so sinister that made Boring Big Storage not boring at all. Morgan and I had a routine to patrol around the storage units at midnight. Then we'd settle into the office with some coffee. We'd chat, study, and occasionally share our life stories and talked about Sato, the old man working the day shift. In our routine patrol, Morgan always hurried past Unit 47 in Aisle D. She said it gave her the creeps. She even refused to walk down that aisle. When I asked her why, she said she heard strange sounds coming from Unit 47 sometimes, like whispers. I laughed it off, thinking she was just spooked by the silence of the night. But to be honest, there was something eerie about Unit 47. Though I didn't hear anything coming from that unit, it somehow seemed darker than everything else around it. One night, while passing by Aisle D, Morgan suddenly stopped and stared at Unit 47. It was unlike her. Before I could say anything, she brushed it off and moved on. My mind couldn't help but wonder what was hidden in that unit that made Morgan so scared of it. It was early morning when Sato came in for his shift. Morgan and I got on the bus, just like any other day. But this day was different. Morgan spotted this big bald guy on the bus, and she seemed really nervous. I noticed that he was eyeing this beautiful Latina. Both of us felt that something was off about this guy. When the Latina got off the bus, the bald guy followed her. I could sense that he was going to do some bad things. I quickly got off the bus too, wanting to make sure she'd be okay. I looked back for Morgan, but she wasn't there. I checked the bus, but still no sign of her. Anyway, I didn't have time to think about that. I had to keep an eye on this guy. It was early, and the streets were pretty empty. I kept my distance, following this guy who was following the Latina. She stopped outside a store, fumbling with her keys, and that's when he made his move. He rushed at her like a wild animal, grabbing her and dragging her into an alleyway. I ran after them, my heart pounding. The guy had her pinned against the wall, his hand around her throat. "Hey!" I yelled. "Let her go!" She was brave. She fought back hard. While he was focused on me, she swung her keys at his face, tearing into his cheek. The guy screamed, "Let her go," and now he was coming at me. He was twice my size. I tried to tackle him, but he zoomed past me, right into the path of a UPS truck. Boom! The sound of that hit was something I'd never forget. He was down, and he wasn't getting back up. But as relief washed over me, I realized Morgan was still missing. Where did she go? What happened to her? My heart sank as I felt something was terribly wrong. The day had just begun, and it was already a roller coaster of emotions. So, I got back to work in the evening, ready to share with Sato about the crazy day. But as soon as I mentioned Morgan, his face went all pale. "You know Morgan? You've seen her?" He stammered, eyes wide as saucers. I was confused and looked around for Morgan, but she was nowhere to be seen. "What you talking about?" "We work together every night," I answered, my heart starting to race. Sato looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Morgan disappeared 6 months ago. No one knows where she is." My stomach dropped. Was he joking? But no, Sato was dead serious. His old eyes filled with tears as he showed me a missing poster from a drawer. It had Morgan's face on it, the same Morgan I'd been laughing with, patrolling with. How could this be? Was I losing my mind? I sank into a chair, trying to process this. Sato explained that Morgan vanished during her shift. When he arrived in the morning, the place was wide open, but no sign of Morgan. There was a lot of blood around the light pole on Aisle D. The cops had no leads, nothing. My head was spinning. The Morgan I knew was lively, funny, real. How could she be missing? And yet, here was Sato, showing me a poster that proved it all. That's when the news notification popped up on my phone. The big bald guy from the bus, the one who attacked the Latina girl, his name was Stan Drummer. He died from the collision with the truck. I shared the news with Sato. His face went white as a sheet. Stan Drummer. I know that name, Sato murmured, flipping through a file. His face turned even paler, if that was possible, as he pulled out a rental agreement. He rented Unit 47. It felt like the ground shifted beneath our feet. Could there be a connection between Morgan's disappearance and this Unit 47? It suddenly hit us. The eerie feelings, Morgan's nervousness around that unit. It all started to make a sinister kind of sense. Since the guys is gone, we should go open up his storage unit, I urged. Sato nodded, grabbing the bolt cutter. We rushed to Unit 47, hearts pounding. Sato cut the padlock, and we slid up the door. A cold breeze hit us. We stepped in with our flashlights. It was dark and eerie. The air smelled bad. Really bad. Rotten. We moved deeper and saw a metal barrel in a corner. Next to it was Morgan's army jacket. Our hearts sank. This was bad. Call the cops, Sato said, voice shaking. I called 911. Waiting for them felt like forever. Finally, they arrived with loud sirens. Stan Drummer had killed Morgan and hid her body here in Unit 47. It hit us hard. Morgan, our lively friend, had gone through something so horrible. Days went by. Nights at boring mini storage felt empty without Morgan's laughter. Sato retired. I got a day job, but the memories of Morgan stayed with us. I don't blame my dad if he actually killed that guy. This weirdo, who said he was a doctor, had this creepy look in his eyes, and it was obvious he had some messed up plans for my little sister. She was only 11, at an age where things should be all sunshine and rainbows, not twisted and scary. But sadly, that's not how things went down for her or for us in that awful night. It was a regular sunny day. My sister had just come back from hanging out at her friend's house a few blocks away. But little did she know, she had brought danger with her right to our front door. So there was this guy who had a really creepy smile that made you feel all freaked out. He came up to her acting all friendly, saying he was a doctor and someone you could trust to make you better. But something about his eyes gave off a totally different vibe. He said he wanted to examine her because she looked sickly with her pale skin. Freaking out, my sister booked it home and locked the door. But surprise, surprise, he was right behind her. He kept ringing the doorbell nonstop. Then he started knocking. Knock, knock, knock. The sound bounced around our empty house, making us really scared. It was only me and my sister, hugging each other tightly, and the quietness between us made our fear even more intense. Our mom wasn't around to protect us anymore. She passed away from cancer last year when I was 12. And Dad, our strong protector, was still at work. We were on our own, but not entirely. The doctor was there, sneaking around, his presence creating creepy shadows that reached out into the room, making us feel scared and helpless. I held my sister tight, reassuring her with empty promises of safety, while I dialed Dad's number with trembling fingers. He answered, panic shot through him as I narrated the ordeal. He urged us to keep all doors locked and stay together. He was rushing home. The doctor got fed up and went to the backyard. He was peeking in through the windows, making us all terrified. We saw him trying to open the back door, but we had managed to lock it with our shaky hands. Finally, my dad showed up. The doctor, realizing this, he disappeared. After dinner that night, everything seemed to have gone back to normal. The doctor was gone. Dad reassured us that he wouldn't dare coming around again. Late at night, out of nowhere, my sister let out a terrifying scream. Dad and I hurried into her room to see what was going on. Shockingly, the doctor was there, lurking by her bedside. as if he had magically appeared in our house, right in her bedroom. Before we could even comprehend what was happening, he bolted out of the room, making a racket as he stomped down the stairs. In the darkness, Dad went after him with a blaze of anger in his eyes. As we trembled with a mix of fear and anticipation, I clung onto my sister tightly. After what felt like forever, Dad returned. His hands were covered in blood, his face was pale, but his eyes burned with a fierce protective fire. He embraced us tightly, assuring us that the nightmare was over. He gently guided us back to bed, but sleep felt far away. A noise from the backyard woke me up. I quietly walked over to the window, and what I saw made my heart sink. Dad was digging a hole. In that moment, I knew what had happened. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to know the details. I got back in bed and said quietly, "I don't blame Dad if he killed that guy." Life moved on, but I couldn't forget that scary day. Our family moved into this cute old house on the outskirts of a quiet town about 45 minutes from Atlanta, Georgia. It was an old, charming place with a lot of history that you could feel in its cracked walls and worn-out roof. Our 10-year-old son, Ben, was just an average kid, but he liked art. His drawings were the usual stick figures and simple sketches that we always put on the fridge. We loved it. After a few weeks of living in our new house, we noticed that Ben was spending a lot of time in what used to be the attic, but was now his new room. It was a bright and airy space, filled with morning light, and it offered a peaceful place to be alone. He said it was perfect for his new hobby, painting. He asked us to buy special paper, paint, and brushes. We thought it was a good idea for him to have a fun hobby, so we got him the stuff he needed. One morning, we found an incredibly captivating painting on the dining table. It was a picture of the countryside that looked so real, like it was alive. The colors were vivid, the brushstrokes were mature, and the whole scene had an artistic touch that only a professional artist could have. At first, we thought it was a printout, but when we looked closer, we could see the texture of the paint and the delicate brushstrokes. It was a real painting. Our jaws dropped as we looked at the artwork. We asked Ben where he got it from. "I painted it," he said, with a big smile on his face. We were skeptical, but as he kept painting more and more masterpieces, we started to believe him. The paintings were all different, but there was always one figure that appeared in them. An old man, with kind eyes and a soft smile, usually surrounded by beautiful landscapes or painting at his own canvas. When we asked Ben about the old man, he said, "Oh, that's Mr. Jasper. He teaches me how to paint." "Mr. Jasper?" we repeated, completely confused. We decided to find out more. Our neighbor told us the story of Jasper Green, a famous artist who used to live and paint in our house. His attic was where he spent most of his time, creating his artwork. We were shocked and a little scared. Our nights became restless. Was our house haunted? Every time Ben brought a new painting downstairs, our hearts raced. Who was this Mr. Jasper that he talked about? How could our son, who had no art skills before, suddenly paint like a professional? One late afternoon, we sat Ben down to talk about Mr. Jasper. Ben took us to the attic, to his favorite spot by the window, where sunlight streamed in like golden liquid. He grabbed his brush, dipped it into the paint, and said, "Mr. Jasper says that every stroke on the canvas is like a whisper from the soul." "Is Mr. Jasper here?" I asked Ben, voice shaking a little. "Yeah, he's sitting right there." Ben pointed at one empty corner of the attic with his brush without even looking up. We saw nothing but an empty chair. My wife and I were both freaked out, but Ben seemed totally calm. The sun was shining and making his face look all angelic as he got his paintbrush ready to create something beautiful on the blank canvas. We stood there, speechless, not knowing how to respond or what to do. Over the next few days, Ben produced more paintings. However, each new piece had a subtle shift. The once vibrant landscapes became darker, the colors more somber, and the themes more eerie. His brushstrokes, once gentle and playful, now seemed hurried and desperate. It was like a storm brewing within his earlier peaceful works. One cold morning, we found a new painting on the dining table. It was completely different from anything Ben had painted before. It showed me and my wife lying lifeless on the floor, while Ben and Mr. Jasper stood beside us with smiles, as if they were proud. It was a disturbing image that gave us chills. The smile on Ben's face in the painting wasn't innocent like we knew it. It was something sinister, something that didn't belong to our sweet boy. Our house, once filled with love, now felt eerie and filled with dread whenever Ben mentioned Mr. Jasper. We couldn't forget the horrific painting. It felt like a scary hint of what was to come. After discussing it all night, my wife and I made a tough decision. We decided to move. We couldn't stay in that house a minute any longer, not with the ghostly presence of Mr. Jasper threatening to ruin our lives. On a calm, cloudy morning, we packed our things, constantly looking around in fear of Mr. Jasper appearing and stopping us. Ben was strangely quiet, but unlike the previous days, there was a subtle smile playing on his lips. He clung to his painter's box like it was his lifeline. As we were leaving, I quickly looked back at the attic. It felt so creepy and empty. Totally crazy. Ben was sitting in the back seat, completely engrossed in the painter's box. I saw from the rear-view mirror that he carefully opened the box. His eyes lit up. He let out a big smile as he looked inside the box. In a quiet voice, almost too soft to hear, he said, "Thanks for coming with me, Mr. Jasper. What are we going to paint next?"